The late autumn wind swept across the Colorado territory like a restless ghost, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Ruth Avery stood at the edge of her small homestead, watching the horizon where the prairie met the darkening sky. The year was 1884, and at 23, she had already learned that waiting was both an art and a burden. Her weathered hands gripped the wooden fence post as she counted the days since Harlan Pierce's last letter. 3 weeks now, and still no word. The correspondent's courtship had lasted 6 months of carefully penned letters between her isolated cabin near Sagebrush Ford and his respectable position in Cheyenne. He had promised to arrive before the first snow, but the clouds gathering like wool against the mountains suggested that promise might be broken. Ruth turned back to her cabin, a modest structure of pine logs that had belonged to old Samuel Hutchins before consumption took him last spring. He'd left it to her in gratitude for the months she'd nursed him, knowing she had nowhere else to go. The townspeople had whispered, of course, a young woman living alone, making cheese and trading eggs for flour and salt. It wasn't proper, they said, but propriety didn't keep the cold away or put food on the table. Inside, the cabin held the warmth of the day's fire. Ruth moved with practiced efficiency, checking the goats in their pen beside the house, gathering the last eggs from her small flock of chickens. Her hands were rough from lye soap and cold water, her arms strong from churning butter and hauling water from the creek. She had learned these skills from her father before the fever took him and her mother both, leaving her orphaned at 16. The evening routine was a comfort. Feed the animals, bank the fire, prepare a simple supper of cornbread and beans. She lit the oil lamp and settled at the rough table with Harlan's letters, reading them again by the yellow light. His handwriting was precise, educated the hand of a man who kept ledgers and understood numbers. He wrote of building a life together, of children and prosperity, of being a proper wife in a proper home. Ruth folded the letters carefully and placed them back in their box. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could smell snow in the air. Her father had taught her to read the weather like scripture, the way clouds bunched against the peaks, how the birds fell silent before a storm, the particular quality of cold that preceded a blizzard. She was banking the fire for the night when the first snowflakes began to fall. Within an hour, the gentle drift had become a driving wall of white. Ruth secured the shutters and checked her supplies, enough flour and preserved goods to last 2 weeks if needed. The animals were sheltered. The woodpile was under cover. She had survived winters alone before. The knock came just as she was preparing for bed. 3 sharp raps against the door, barely audible above the wind. Ruth froze, her hand moving instinctively to the Springfield rifle mounted above the fireplace. No one traveled in weather like this unless driven by desperation or worse. "Who's there?" she called, not moving to unlatch the door. "Name's Jonah Reed." The voice was hoarse, strained. "My horse went lame 2 miles back. I saw your light." Ruth peered through a crack in the shutters, but could see only swirling snow and darkness. "The Garrison place is 3 miles east. They take in travelers." "Can't make 3 miles. A pause, then, "Ma'am, I'm hurt. Not asking for charity, just shelter from the storm. I can pay." Something in his voice, not pleading exactly, but a kind of resigned honesty made Ruth hesitate. She lifted the rifle, checked that it was loaded, and held it ready as she unlatched the door. The man who stumbled in with a gust of snow and wind was tall but hunched with cold and something else. His coat was torn at the shoulder, dark with what might have been blood. Ice crusted his beard, and his eyes gray as the storm outside held a wariness that matched her own. "Thank you," he said simply, then swayed on his feet. Ruth kept the rifle trained on him. "The kitchen's through there. You can bed down by the stove. Come morning, you'll move on." He nodded, understanding the terms. As he passed her, she caught the scent of leather and gunpowder, blood and horse sweat. His holster was empty, she noted, though that meant little. Men had ways of hiding weapons. In the kitchen, he sank onto the bench by the stove with obvious relief. Now, in the lamplight, Ruth could see him better. Perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of face that had seen too much angular features marked by sun and wind. A scar along his jaw that spoke of violence survived. His clothes were decent quality but travel-worn. His boots expensive, but down at heel. "That shoulder needs tending," she said, surprising herself. He glanced at the torn coat. "It's nothing." Nothing doesn't bleed that much. Ruth set the rifle within reach and fetched her medical supplies skills learned from her father, who'd doctored horses and men alike. "Take off the coat." He hesitated, then complied. The shirt beneath was soaked with blood from a gash that ran from shoulder to chest. Not a bullet wound, she'd seen enough of those, but something sharp and deliberate. "Knife?" she asked, threading a needle. "Something like that." She didn't press in the territories. Sometimes not knowing was safer. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth. The cut was deep but clean, as if made by someone who knew their business. Her stitches were neat and small, the way her father had taught her. "You've done this before," Jonah observed. "My father was a horse doctor. Taught me that men aren't much different when it comes to sewing them up." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Comforting thought. When she finished, she stepped back, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation. A strange man in her kitchen, shirt half off, the storm sealing them in together. The gossips in town would feast on this for months. "There's blankets in that chest," she said, gesturing to the corner. "I'll bring you something to eat." She retreated to her small pantry, hands trembling slightly as she sliced bread and cold ham. When she returned, he had pulled his torn shirt back on and was sitting quietly, watching the snow drive against the windows. "Thank you," he said again as she set the plate before him. "Not many would open their door on a night like this. Not many would be traveling in it either." He acknowledged this with a slight nod. Sometimes a man doesn't choose his weather. They sat in awkward silence while he ate. Ruth found herself studying him covertly. His hands were steady despite the pain he must be feeling, his movements economical. There was a contained quality about him, like a wolf that had learned to walk among dogs but never forgotten its nature. "You from around here?" she asked finally. "No, passing through from Montana way. Heading south, maybe New Mexico territory. Running from something." Then Ruth recognized the careful vagueness, the way his eyes checked the windows and door even while eating. She'd seen it in men who passed through Sagebrush Ford, men with prices on their heads or blood on their hands. "And you?" he asked. "Family?" "Dead. This was my employer's place. He left it to me when he passed." "You run it alone." There was nothing improper in the question. But Ruth stiffened. "I manage well enough." Didn't mean offense, just, he gestured at the neat kitchen, the preserved goods lining the shelves, the well-maintained rifle. "It's clear you know your business. Not many women would choose this life. Not many women get to choose at all." That earned her a long look. True enough. The wind howled louder, and somewhere a shutter banged loose. Ruth started to rise, but Jonah was already on his feet. "I'll see to it," he said. "Least I can do." She watched him go, noting how he moved despite the wound alert. Careful, ready. Whatever had driven him out into this storm, it had taught him caution. When he returned, snow in his hair and color back in his cheeks from the cold, he seemed more solid somehow, more real. "Secured it proper. Shouldn't give you more trouble." Ruth nodded. Suddenly tired, the strain of the day, the unexpected company, the worry about Harlan, it all seemed to settle on her shoulders at once. "Bid you good night. Mr. Reed, come morning." "I'll be gone. Yes, ma'am." She took the rifle and headed for her small bedroom, pausing at the doorway. "The storm looks to last, if it does." "I'll work for my keep." You have my word." His word. Ruth wondered what that was worth, coming from a man who traveled wounded through blizzards with careful lies. But there was something in his eyes, not honesty exactly, but a kind of recognition. They were both people whom life had placed outside the normal boundaries, making their way as best they could. "Good night, Mr. Reed." "Good night, Miss Avery." Ruth latched her bedroom door and set the rifle beside her bed. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in this small space together. She thought of Harlan's letters, of the proper life he promised, of the distance between words on paper and the reality of a man bleeding in her kitchen. Before sleep took her, she heard movement in the kitchen, Jonah banking the fire, settling himself on the floor despite her mention of blankets and the bench, choosing the spot that would let him watch the door. She realized, whatever he was running from, he didn't expect it to give up easy. The wind screamed across the prairie, and snow piled against the walls like the weight of all the choices that had led them both to this moment. Tomorrow would bring its own problems, questions from town if anyone saw him, decisions about what to do if the storm continued. But tonight, there was only the strange comfort of another human presence in the house, even one that came with shadows and secrets. Ruth pulled the quilts up to her chin and listened to the storm. Somewhere out there, Harlan might be trying to reach her, the kind husband she'd been promised. But here in the warmth of her cabin was something else entirely. A stranger with dangerous eyes and careful movements, bleeding from wounds he wouldn't explain. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about which man she was truly waiting for. Dawn came late and gray, the storm still raging beyond the frosted windows. Ruth woke to find the fire already built up, coffee warming on the stove, and fresh water in the kitchen bucket. Jonah Reed sat at the table, his back to the wall, watching the door with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting. "Morning," he said simply, rising as she entered. "Hope you don't mind. Figured I'd earn my keep." Ruth noticed how he favored his wounded shoulder, though he tried to hide it. In daylight, filtered through the storm-darkened windows, she could see the careful way he'd arranged things, the water bucket positioned where it wouldn't be in her way, the coffee pot at just the right distance from the flames. A man who paid attention to details, who understood how a kitchen worked. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. You do good work." She poured coffee for them both, the domesticity of the moment strange and unsettling. Outside, the wind howled worse than the night before, snow piling against the windows until only the top panes showed gray light. "We're locked in proper," Jonah observed. "This storm's got staying power." Ruth nodded, trying not to think about what that meant. Days, perhaps. Trapped here with this stranger. She noticed something else in the morning light. The gash on his shoulder had been too clean, too precise. Not the ragged tear of accident or even a fight, but something deliberate, made to hurt, made to mark. "I need to check your wound," she said. "See if the stitches held." He submitted to her ministrations without complaint. The wound looked better, no signs of festering. But as she worked, her fingers found older scars, a bullet furrow along his ribs. What might have been knife work on his back. This was a man who'd lived by violence, survived it repeatedly. "You're wondering," he said quietly. "It's not my business." "No, but you've a right to know what kind of man you've sheltered." He pulled his shirt back on. Movements careful. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Worked for people who, well, let's say I chose my company poorly." Ruth busied herself putting away the medical supplies. "We all make choices we regret. Some choices follow you longer than others." The morning passed in careful cooperation. Jonah insisted on helping with chores, despite his injury, checking what animals could be reached through the covered walkway to the shelter, hauling in more firewood from the protected pile. Ruth found herself watching him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he seemed to catalog every entrance and exit. They were sharing a simple midday meal when the sound cut through the storm, a horse's whinny, closer than it should be. Jonah was on his feet instantly, hand going to his hip where no gun rested. "Expecting someone?" His voice had gone flat. Dangerous. The mail writer sometimes. But even as Ruth spoke, she heard what had alarmed him. Not one horse, but several. And voices calling through the wind. A fist hammered on the door. "Hello, the house mail delivery?" Ruth recognized Tom Morrison's voice and relaxed. But Jonah had backed into the corner, tension radiating from him like heat. She gave him a warning look and went to the door. Tom stood on her porch. Wrapped in so many layers, he looked like a walking blanket pile. Behind him, she could make out his pack horse, laden with mail pouches. "Miss Ruth, thank the Lord you're all right. This storm's got everybody locked down tight." He pressed an envelope into her hands, and her heart jumped, seeing the Fort Laramie postmark. "This came marked urgent. Figured you'd want it. What with waiting on Mr. Pierce and all." Ruth's fingers trembled as she took the letter. "Thank you, Tom. You shouldn't have risked—" "Part of the job, ma'am." His eyes tried to peer past her into the cabin. "You managing all right? Got enough supplies?" "I'm fine." She moved to block his view. "You should get to shelter." "Going to hole up at the garrison place till this blows over?" Another attempt to see inside. "You sure you're—" "I'm fine. Tom, thank you." She closed the door firmly, leaning against it. When she turned, Jonah had emerged from his corner, watching her with those careful gray eyes. "Letter from your intended." Ruth looked at the envelope, at the official seal, at handwriting that wasn't Harlan's. Her hands shook as she opened it, and she had to read the words 3 times before they made sense. "Miss Avery." She read aloud, voice hollow. "It is my unfortunate duty to inform you that Mr. Harlan Pierce was found deceased on the road between Cheyenne and Sagebrush Ford on November 2nd. Circumstances of his death remain under investigation. His effects will be forwarded pending." The letter slipped from her fingers. Ruth sank onto the bench, the world seeming to tilt around her. 6 months of letters, of plans, of hope for something better than solitude and struggle gone. "I'm sorry," Jonah said quietly. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd appeared in the storm just as her future dissolved. "Did you know him, Harlan Pierce?" Something flickered across his face. "I knew of him. He worked for the Army Paymaster's office in Cheyenne." "Knew of him?" Ruth's voice sharpened. "And you just happened to show up here, wounded, the night I get word he's dead." Jonah held her gaze steadily. "I won't lie to you. There's connection, but not what you're thinking." "Then what?" He moved to the window, checking the storm, buying time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, choosing words like a man picking his way through a minefield. "There was an Army payroll shipment that went missing 2 months back. 60,000 in gold certificates meant for Fort Laramie. The man I was working for, Asa Crow, he was behind it, had inside information." He turned back to her. "That information came from someone in the paymaster's office." Ruth felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "You're saying Harlan—" "I'm saying he was involved, willing or not. When the job went bad, when men died who shouldn't have, some of us wanted out. Your Harlan, he tried to disappear, make a new life." Jonah touched his wounded shoulder unconsciously. "Asa doesn't let people just walk away. You're one of them. The thieves, the murderers." "Was—" the word came out hard. "I left that life, or tried to. The shoulder—" "That was Asa's way of marking me as a traitor. Would have done worse. But I got away." Ruth stood abruptly, needing distance. "And you came here?" "I came here because I was bleeding and saw light in a storm. I didn't know this was where Pierce was headed. Didn't know about you." He paused. "But now that I do, I need to tell you something. If Asa killed Pierce, he might think the man told you something, left something with you. These letters you've been trading, Asa knows about them." "That's insane." Harlan's letters were about marriage, about— Ruth stopped. There had been one letter, different from the others. Numbers that didn't make sense, mentions of securing their future that she'd taken for romantic planning. Jonah saw her realization. He leave you anything, numbers, maybe locations. Get out. The words came out ice cold. Get out of my house. Miss Avery, Ruth, listen to me. Asa Crow doesn't leave loose ends. If he thinks you know something— I said get out. She grabbed the rifle, aimed it at his chest. Storm or no storm, you leave now. Jonah raised his hand slowly. I'm trying to protect you. Like you protected Harlan? That hit home. She saw him flinch, saw something that might have been genuine remorse cross his features. I didn't know about Pierce until after. Didn't know he was trying to get out, trying to be better. When I found out— He gestured at his shoulder. This was the price for asking too many questions. Ruth's hands shook, but the rifle didn't waver. She felt as if the world had shifted, revealing rot beneath what she'd thought was solid ground. Harlan, her respectable intended, her hope for a normal life tangled up in theft and murder. This wounded stranger in her kitchen, claiming to offer protection while bringing danger to her door. There was a letter, she heard herself say, different from the others. Numbers and mentions of old debts to settle. I thought it was about money he owed. Where is it? She almost didn't answer, then realized it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. In the Bible, pressed in Psalms. Jonah moved carefully to the shelf, found the Bible, extracted the letter. He read it quickly, and she saw his expression tighten. These aren't debts, they're coordinates. And this reference to settling accounts, he was trying to tell you where he hid his share. His share of blood money. Money that could get you killed if Asa thinks you have it. Jonah folded the letter, held it out to her. Burn this, forget you ever saw it. When this storm breaks, take what you can carry and leave. Start over somewhere Asa won't think to look. Ruth laughed, a bitter sound. Start over. This is all I have. This cabin, these animals, they're my life. Your life won't be worth much if Asa— The sound of horses cut him off again. Many horses this time, and no friendly mail carrier's call. Jonah moved fast, dousing the lamp, banking the fire. Get down. Stay quiet. But Ruth recognized one of the voices shouting through the storm. Marshal Eli North from town. His bass rumble unmistakable. Ruth Avery, need to speak with you about Harlan Pierce. She started to rise, but Jonah caught her arm. Wait, how'd they get here in this storm? Why now? Right after the mail came. He was right. The timing was too convenient. Ruth peered through a crack in the shutters and saw not just the marshal, but 4 other riders, all armed, all watching the cabin with predatory patience. Miss Avery, the marshal's voice again. We know you're in there. Just want to talk about your correspondence with Pierce, about what he might have sent you. They're not here for justice. Jonah whispered, someone's paying them to find that money. Ruth's mind raced. The respectable life she'd built, the reputation she'd fought for, all hanging by a thread. A dead fiancé involved in crime. Stolen money, maybe hidden on her land. A wounded outlaw in her kitchen. The gossips would destroy her even if the law didn't. I'll go out. Jonah said, tell them I forced my way in, held you hostage. You're an innocent victim in all this. They'll hang you. Maybe, but you'll live. She looked at him, this stranger who'd brought danger to her door but now offered to die for her mistake in opening it. Something in his gray eyes reminded her of her father's old saying, judge a man not by his words or his past, but by what he does when the stakes are highest. No, she said firmly. We handle this together. Before he could protest, she called out, Marshal North, I'm coming out. Just let me get my coat. Ruth, Jonah warned. But she was already moving, grabbing her coat and something else, the small paring knife from her kitchen, sliding it into her apron pocket. A woman's weapon, easily overlooked. "Stay inside," she told him. "Watch from the window. If this goes bad, I won't let them hurt you." The promise in his voice was fierce, and Ruth believed him. Whatever else Jonah Reed was, thief, killer, outlaw in this moment, he was her ally. She opened the door to face the storm and the men who'd come calling, carrying secrets that could destroy them all. The wind tore at her hair, snow stinging her face. But Ruth stood straight. She'd survived alone this long by being stronger than people expected. Now she'd find out if that was enough. The storm held them prisoner for 3 days. After Marshal North and his men had left grudgingly accepting Ruth's story about knowing nothing of Harlan's dealings, an uneasy domesticity settled over the cabin. The blizzard raged on, sealing them in together, forcing a strange intimacy between two people who had every reason to distrust each other. Ruth woke each morning to find Jonah had already risen. The fire built up, water hauled despite the screaming wind. He moved through her space with careful respect, never presuming, always maintaining the boundaries of a hired hand earning his keep. But she noticed things, how he automatically checked the windows before settling anywhere, the way his hand would move to his absent gun when sounds came too close, how he slept light as a cat despite his exhaustion. "You should let me look at that shoulder again," she said on the second morning, watching him struggle with the firewood. "It's healing. It's pulling. I can see it from here." He submitted to her care with the same quiet patience he brought to everything, as she worked, replacing the bandage, checking the stitches. She found herself talking about the cabin, about old Sam Hutchins who'd left it to her, about the challenges of making cheese that the townspeople would actually buy. "My father used to say the secret was in the temperature," she found herself explaining. "Too warm and it goes soft. Too cold and it won't set proper. You have to know your milk, know your weather, know your timing." "Sounds like life," Jonah observed. "All about timing." She paused, hands stilling on the bandage. "Is that what brought you here, bad timing?" "Good timing. Maybe—" Storm drove me to the one door that would open. He caught her hand gently as she finished. "I meant what I said before, about protecting you." Ruth pulled away, confused by the warmth of his touch. "I've been protecting myself for years." "I know. I can see it in everything here, the way you've reinforced the shutters, how you position the furniture so you can see all the entrances, that knife you keep in your apron." His smile was rueful. "We recognize our own kind." That afternoon, as snow continued to fall, they found themselves sharing the main room in companionable silence. Ruth worked on mending while Jonah carefully oiled the hinges on her doors, fixed the sticky latch on the shutters, small repairs she'd been putting off for months. "You don't have to," she said. "I like working with my hands. Reminds me of—" He stopped, face closing off. "Of what?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My father was a carpenter. Before the war, had a shop in Missouri. Made furniture for the quality folks. I used to help him. Learning how wood speaks if you listen, right?" "What happened?" "War happened. Border raids. Shop burned. Parents dead. Sister." His hand stilled on the hinge. "I was 15, old enough to want revenge, young enough to think violence would balance the scales." Ruth set aside her mending. "Did it?" "No. Just added more weight to the wrong side." He went back to work. Movements precise. "Been trying to find my way back ever since. Thought working for wages was honest enough. Didn't look too close at who was paying or why. Then one day you wake up and realize you've become the thing that destroyed your life in the first place." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Ruth thought of her own losses, the choices that had led her to this isolated cabin, waiting for letters from a man she'd never met. "I waited for a kind husband," she said quietly, surprising herself with the words. "Someone safe, respectable, someone who would make me proper in the eyes of the town." Jonah looked at her, really looked, and she felt exposed under that gray gaze. And instead, a stranger arrived. She met his eyes and promised protection with a dangerous smile. The words from her thought hung in the air like a challenge, an acknowledgement of something shifting between them. Jonah's expression changed, that careful control slipping to reveal something hungrier, more uncertain. "Ruth, I know what you are," she continued. "What you've done. I should be terrified. Should have let the marshal take you. Why didn't you—" She thought of that moment on the porch, Marshal North's suspicious questions, the way she'd lied smooth as butter about being alone, about seeing no strangers. "Because you offered to die for me. A man who'd do that, there's good in him still. Buried, maybe. But there. You don't know that. I know you could have forced your way in that first night, could have taken what you needed and left me hurt or worse. Instead, you knocked, asked, said please and thank you." She picked up her mending again. "My father used to say you judge a man by how he treats those who can't fight back. You had all the power that night, and you chose to be gentle." Jonah was quiet for so long she wondered if she'd offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Been a long time since anyone looked for good in me. Maybe you've been keeping the wrong company." That startled a laugh from him, rusty but genuine. "Definitely been doing that." The day wore on. Storm still raging, but the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. They worked together preparing dinner, Jonah learning her kitchen's rhythms, Ruth finding herself relaxing in his presence. He told her about the territories he'd traveled, careful to avoid specifics but painting pictures with words: the red rocks of Utah, the endless grass of Montana, mountains that scraped the sky. "You've seen so much," she said wistfully. "I've never been further than Cheyenne. Seeing isn't the same as belonging. I've covered a lot of ground, but never found a place that felt like—" He gestured at the cabin, the warm kitchen, the circle of lamplight. "Like home." After supper, Ruth brought out her father's old Winchester. "If trouble's coming, I should know this better than I do." Jonah's eyebrows rose. "You want me to teach you to shoot?" "I can shoot. I want to shoot well." He took the rifle, checking it with professional efficiency. "It's well maintained. Your father's—" "Everything I have was his or Sam's, built from other people's leavings." She tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Nothing wrong with that. Means you know the value of things. Don't take them for granted." He handed the rifle back. "First lesson, it's not about the gun. It's about breathing, stance, knowing your target." They cleared a space in the main room, and Jonah walked her through the basics. Ruth had shot before, had to, living alone, but this was different. He taught her to read wind through window cracks, to gauge distance in a room, to use furniture as cover. "You're teaching me to fight indoors," she observed. "If Asa comes, it won't be a polite visit in daylight. You need to know how to defend your home." His hands adjusted her stance, steady and impersonal, but Ruth felt each touch like a brand. When had she last been this close to a man? When had anyone taken such care with her? "Breathe," he murmured near her ear, slow and steady. "The shot happens between heartbeats, in the quiet space." Ruth focused on the target he'd marked on the wall, but her awareness was all on him, the warmth at her back, the careful distance he maintained even while instructing, the way he smelled of wood smoke and leather. "Good," he said as she dry-fired. "Again." They practiced until her arms ached, until she could find her stance without thinking, until the rifle felt like an extension of her will rather than her father's tool. "You're a natural," Jonah said finally. "Quick learner." "Good teacher." She set the rifle aside, rubbing her shoulder. "Though I hope I never need this knowledge." "So do I." His expression darkened. "But hope doesn't stop bullets." That night, as they settled into their respective spaces, Jonah still insisting on the kitchen floor despite her offers of better bedding, Ruth found herself unable to sleep. The storm was finally weakening. which meant their strange isolation would end soon. Jonah would leave. She'd face the town's questions. Life would continue. But something had changed in these 3 days. The careful life she'd built, the patient waiting for respectability, it all seemed pale and thin compared to the reality of companionship, even dangerous companionship. She thought of Harlan's letters, full of promises and propriety, and compared them to Jonah teaching her to defend herself, his honest confession of past sins, the way he'd worked to earn his keep without being asked. Which was the better man, the one who wrote pretty words, or the one whose actions spoke of reform? In the kitchen, she heard Jonah shift, probably checking the windows again, protecting her even in sleep. This stranger who'd arrived with violence at his heels but gentleness in his hands. "I waited for a kind husband," she whispered to the darkness. "What I found might be better, or it might destroy everything I've built. Tomorrow the storm would break. Decisions would need making. But tonight, in this small circle of warmth while winter raged outside, Ruth allowed herself to feel something she'd thought frozen out of her hope for more than mere survival. For a life chosen rather than accepted. The wind was dying, but her heart was just beginning to thaw. The storm broke on the 4th morning, leaving behind a world transformed by white. Ruth stood at her window watching the sun spark off fresh snow. Everything clean and pristine as if the earth had been remade. But she knew better beneath that pure surface lay the same hard ground, the same struggles waiting. I should go. Jonah stood in the doorway, his few belongings already gathered. In the morning light, she could see him clearly, the healing wound, the wariness that never quite left his eyes. The way he held himself ready for flight or fight. "The road won't be clear for days," Ruth said, not turning from the window. "Snow's too deep for safe travel." "I've traveled through worse." "Have you?" She faced him then. "Or are you running again because staying's harder than leaving?" He flinched at that. "Staying puts you at risk. The marshal's already suspicious. If I'm seen here, then we'll deal with it. Like we dealt with his questions before." She moved to the stove, starting breakfast with deliberate calm. "Besides, you promised to help me prepare. Asa Crow's still out there." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm of preparation. Jonah showed her how to barricade effectively, where to place water buckets in case of fire, how to create clear sight lines from the windows. He dug shallow trenches around the cabin's perimeter that would trip horses or men in darkness, disguising them with careful placement of snow. Word of the stranger had already spread through Sagebrush Ford. Mrs. Harrington from the general store made a point of riding out, ostensibly to check on Ruth after the storm. "Living alone as you do," the older woman said, eyes sharp as she took in Jonah chopping wood in the yard. "People worry. Especially with strangers about." "Mr. Reed's been a great help," Ruth replied evenly. "The storm damaged my roof. He's working off the cost of shelter and meals with repairs." "Reed. Is it?" Mrs. Harrington's tone suggested she'd be checking that name against wanted posters. "And where might Mr. Reed hail from?" "Montana way," Jonah said, appearing in the doorway with an armload of wood. He touched his hat politely. "Ma'am, Mrs." Harrington studied him with the intensity of a woman who'd made gossip her life's work. "You wouldn't be the same Reed who had that trouble up in Billings." "No trouble with the law, if that's what you're asking." Jonah replied smoothly. "Just a man working his way south for warmer weather." After the woman left, trailing skepticism like perfume, Ruth sank onto the bench. "She'll have the whole town talking by nightfall." "Let them talk. Better they think me a drifter than what I really am." He stacked the wood carefully. "Though I'm sorry for what it means for your reputation." "My reputation was already suspect. A woman alone, refusing to marry the first man who offered, making her own way. I've been a scandal waiting to happen." That evening, as they shared supper, Jonah asked, "Why didn't you marry, before Harlan? There must have been others." Ruth considered her words. There were boys from town, a traveling merchant, even a cavalry officer once, but they all wanted to change me, make me into something proper and small. Harlan's letters were different. He seemed to want a partner, not just a wife. Yes, well, we both know how that turned out. She pushed beans around her plate. What about you? Ever think about settling down before everything? Once, there was a girl in Kansas, minister's daughter, sweet as honey, innocent as dawn. I thought, he shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought, man like me had no business courting innocence. You were young. You could have changed course then. Maybe, but I was angry. Thought the world owed me for what it took. By the time I figured out that debt only compounds, I was in too deep. He met her eyes. Until now. The weight of that admission hung between them. Ruth felt her cheeks warm and busied herself clearing dishes. These moments were becoming more frequent loaded silences, lingering looks, an awareness that hummed beneath their careful cooperation. 2 days later, the test came. Ruth was in the barn checking her goats when she heard horses approaching. Through a crack in the wall, she saw 2 riders, hard-faced men who moved like predators. One had a shoulder bandage visible beneath his coat. She slipped back to the house, her heart hammering. "Company," she told Jonah tersely. 2 men, one's wounded. He was already moving, checking the rifle, positioning himself. "Kell and Dobbs, Asa's men, get ready." Ruth took her position at the window, Winchester steady in her hands. The men dismounted at the fence line, making a show of checking their horses' hooves. "Hello, the house," the wounded one, Kell, called out. "Looking for a friend of ours. Tall fellow, dark hair. Might be nursing an injury." "No one here but me," Ruth called back. "And I'm particular about my visitors." "Now that's unfriendly," Dobbs drawled, hand resting on his pistol. "We're just asking questions. Ask them from there." Kell took a step forward. "Maybe you don't understand. Our friend has something that belongs to our boss. We aim to collect." Ruth's shot kicked up snow an inch from his boot. "Maybe you don't understand. I said stay back." Both men froze, hands hovering near weapons. "That's a nice rifle," Kell said carefully. "But there's 2 of us and 1 of you." "She's not alone." Jonah's voice came from the barn he'd slipped out the back, flanking them. Both visitors spun, caught between 2 firing positions. "Reed," Dobbs spat. "Should have known you'd hide behind a woman's skirts." "I'm standing right here in the open. Question is, are you boys smart enough to ride away? Or do we water this snow with blood?" For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Kell laughed, ugly and low. "Ace is coming. Reed. Maybe not today, but soon. And he won't be satisfied with just you anymore. Not after you got his baby brother killed. Micah chose his road. We all did. Tell that to Asa when he's decorating that pretty cabin with your innards." Kell backed toward his horse. "Ma'am, you might want to reconsider your house guests. This one brings death wherever he goes." They mounted and rode off, but Ruth could see them stop just out of rifle range, conferring. She stayed at her position until Jonah returned, face grim. "They're scouting," he said, "testing our defenses. They'll be back with more men." His brother. Jonah's jaw tightened. Micah Crow. Just 18. Thought he was 10 feet tall and bulletproof because his brother ran the gang. He died in the payroll robbery, trying to prove himself. My fault I was supposed to watch him, keep him back from the shooting. "What happened?" "He charged in, guns blazing. Took 3 bullets before he went down. I carried him out, tried to stop the bleeding, but he turned away. Asa blames me for not dying instead." That night, they took shifts watching. Ruth insisted on her turn despite Jonah's protests, sitting at the window with the rifle while he caught a few hours' sleep. She found herself studying his face in repose. The harsh lines softened. The constant vigilance relaxed. He looked younger, almost peaceful. When he woke for his shift, he found her still watching. "See something?" "Just thinking." She yielded the chair to him. "About choices and consequences." Heavy thoughts for the small hours. Kel was right. Wasn't he you bring death? But not the way he meant. She wrapped her shawl tighter. "You carry it with you, all the lives lost, the might-have-beens. It's made you careful with life now." Philosophical for a cheesemaker. "My father read philosophy to my mother while she was dying. Said it helped them both face what couldn't be changed." She paused at the doorway. "I'm not afraid, of Asa or his men." "You should be." "No, I'm afraid of going back to the way things were. Alone, safe, small." She met his eyes. "I'd rather face whatever comes than return to that living death." Jonah stood abruptly, crossing to her. For a moment they were close enough to touch, to breach the careful distance they'd maintained. "Ruth," he said, voice rough, "when this is over—" "Don't." She placed a finger against his lips. "Don't make promises you might not live to keep. Just be here now." He caught her hand, held it. "I'm trying to protect you." "I know, but I'm not asking for protection anymore." She pulled away gently. "I'm asking for a partner, someone who'll stand beside me, not in front of me." The next morning brought Marshall north again, this time alone. He accepted Ruth's offer of coffee, settling at her table with the weight of a man carrying difficult news. "Those two riders yesterday, Kel Baxter and Marcus Dobbs, both wanted men." He studied Jonah over his cup. "Interesting they'd show up here." "Lots of people pass through," Ruth said. "True, but not many get shot at for their trouble." North's smile was thin. "Mrs. Harrington was quite detailed about the gunshots she heard." "Warning shot," Ruth admitted. "They were trespassing. Wouldn't leave when asked." "And you just happened to have backup." The marshal's gaze hadn't left Jonah. "Mr. Reed, is it you handle yourself like a man familiar with trouble?" "I've seen my share," Jonah said carefully. "But I'm not wanted. You can check." "Oh, I did. Jonah Reed Carpenter's son from Missouri. Worked cattle in Montana. No warrants. Clean as fresh paper." North set down his cup. Almost too clean. Like someone built that history careful-like. Ruth's hand moved toward the rifle, but North raised a peaceful palm. "I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here because Asa Crow's been spotted moving south with 8 men. Whatever he's after, whoever he's hunting, this town's in his path." "Then stop him," Ruth said. "That's your job." "With what I've got 2 deputies, both green as spring grass. Town council won't pay for more men because they're too busy arguing about tax rates." North stood. "I'm telling you this as a warning, and maybe a request. If trouble comes, this town could use men who know which end of a gun to point." After he left, Ruth and Jonah stood in silence, the weight of coming violence pressing down like storm clouds. 8 men, Ruth said finally. "Plus Asa makes 9? "Odds I've faced before, but not with someone else to worry about." Jonah touched her arm. "You could still leave. Take what you can carry. Start fresh somewhere." "No." The word came out firm as bedrock. "This is my home, my land. I've run from enough in my life, from grief, from loneliness, from the person I wanted to be. I'm done running. Even if it means dying." She looked at him, this dangerous man who'd taught her to shoot, who watched over her sleep, who carried death as a companion but touched her with infinite care. "There are worse things than dying," she said. "Living without ever really choosing, that's one of them." The sun was setting, painting the snow blood red. Somewhere out there, Asa Crow was coming, bringing violence and vengeance. But in this moment, in this small cabin, 2 people stood together, choosing courage over safety, connection over isolation. The fire burned low, and darkness crept across the land, but neither moved to light the lamps. They stood together in the gathering dusk, preparing for war, finding peace in each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, they had a partnership forged in necessity, tempered by trust, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something worth fighting for. The attack came at dawn, when the world balanced between night and day, that gray hour when shadows played tricks and tired sentries saw phantoms in every movement. But Ruth and Jonah were ready, had been ready for 3 days since Marshal North's warning. Ruth woke to the soft whistle Jonah had taught her danger approaching. She rolled from bed fully dressed, grabbed the Winchester, and took her position at the east window. Through the frost-etched glass, she saw them dark shapes against the snow, moving in from 3 directions. "How many?" she whispered as Jonah crouched beside the south window. "I count 7. Asa's not showing himself yet." He checked his borrowed pistol, Ruth's father's old Colt. "Remember what we practiced? Short bursts, then move. Don't stay in one spot long enough for them to get a bead on you." The morning stillness shattered with Asa Crow's voice, rough as gravel. "Jonah Reed, you've got something that belongs to me. My brother's blood is on your hands, and I aim to collect." "Micah's blood is on his own hands." Jonah called back, "I tried to save him." "Liar!" The word cracked like a whip. "You let him die, used him as a shield while you ran." Ruth saw Jonah flinch, whatever the truth of that night. He carried guilt like a millstone. She touched his shoulder briefly. "Stay focused." "And the woman," Asa continued. "She doesn't need to die for your sins. Send her out, and we'll make this quick between us." "The woman can speak for herself," Ruth shouted. "This is my land. You're not welcome here." A harsh laugh. "Brave words. Let's see if you're still brave when the lead starts flying." The first shot splintered wood above Ruth's head. She ducked, counted to 3, then rose and fired at the muzzle flash. A cry told her she'd hit her mark. The battle was joined. What followed was chaos punctuated by terrible clarity. Ruth's world narrowed to the rhythm Jonah had taught her: breathe, aim, squeeze, move. The cabin became a battleground. Windows shattering, wood splintering. The acrid smell of gunpowder thick in the air. She dropped one attacker trying to rush the north side, winged another who got too close to the barn where her animals huddled. Jonah was a deadly ghost, appearing at windows, firing with mechanical precision, vanishing before return fire could find him. "The roof!" he shouted. Ruth looked up to see smoke. They'd thrown torches, trying to burn them out. She grabbed the water buckets they'd strategically placed, dousing flames while Jonah covered her. An attacker tried to use the distraction, charging the door. Ruth spun, fired from the hip, and watched him crumple. Her hands were steady, but her mind registered the horror. That was someone's son, perhaps someone's father. But then she thought of her own losses, of the life she'd built here, of the man fighting beside her, and pushed the doubt away. Survival had no room for philosophy. Ruth down. She dropped as bullets stitched the air where she'd stood. Jonah rolled past, fired through the shattered window, then helped her to better cover. "You're bleeding," she noticed, a graze along his temple. Later, they're regrouping. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw they'd taken a toll. 3 attackers down, maybe 4, but ammunition was running low, and the remaining men were finding better positions. Then Asa Crow himself appeared, walking bold as brass across the yard. A massive figure in a long duster, twin Colts in his hands. "Enough, Jonah. Face me like a man. Let's end this proper." "Don't," Ruth hissed, but Jonah was already moving. "He's right. This won't stop until one of us is dead." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw goodbye. "Whatever happens, you get to that marshal, tell him everything." Before she could protest, he was out the door, walking to meet his fate. The 2 men faced each other in the churned snow. 20 paces apart, Ruth watched from the doorway, rifle ready, heart hammering. Around them, the surviving attackers held their fire, honoring the old code of single combat. "You took my brother from me," Asa said, voice thick with hate. "Micah took himself. I tried to hold him back." "He worshipped you. Would have followed you to hell?" "He did." Jonah's voice was infinitely sad. "That's the problem." Asa went for his guns, fast as thought. But Jonah was already moving, diving left as he drew. Both men fired. Asa's bullets carved air where Jonah had been. Jonah's shot took Asa in the shoulder, spinning him. But Asa was tough as old leather. He stayed on his feet, raising his left-hand gun. Jonah rolled, came up firing, but his gun clicked empty. Time slowed. Ruth saw Asa smile, saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw Jonah's acceptance of death. Without thought, she burst from the doorway, her father's paring knife leaving her hand in a silver arc. The blade took Asa in the side, just under the ribs, angled up as Jonah had shown her in those quiet evenings. Asa's shot went wide. He looked down at the knife handle protruding from his coat, surprise replacing fury. "The woman," he said, almost wondering. Then his knees buckled. Jonah caught him as he fell, easing him to the ground. "I'm sorry about Micah," he said quietly. "He was a good kid. Should have had a better chance." Asa's breathing was labored. You really tried to save him." "With everything I had." Something like peace crossed Asa's features. Maybe that's enough." His eyes found Ruth. "You've got sand, woman. Take care of this fool." And then he was gone, the terrible vitality draining away, leaving just another body in the snow. The remaining attackers stood frozen, leaderless. Then Kell raised his rifle toward Ruth. Jonah moved to shield her, but the shot came from behind them. Marshal North and a hastily assembled posse had arrived, drawn by the gunfire. What followed was swift. The surviving attackers surrendered or fled. North took in the scene, the bodies, the burned cabin wall, Ruth and Jonah standing together covered in smoke and blood. "Hell of a thing," he said finally. "Going to be a lot of paperwork." Ruth found herself laughing, high and slightly hysterical. After facing death, paperwork seemed absurd. Jonah's arm came around her, steady and warm, and the laughter turned to tears she'd been holding back for years. Later, as the bodies were loaded onto a wagon and statements were given, North pulled Jonah aside. "That was Jonah Reed out there, fighting to defend this woman and her property. Nothing more needs saying about who else you might have been." Jonah met his gaze. "I appreciate that, Marshal." "Don't. I'm being practical. This town needs men who can stand. You've proven that. What you do with the chance is up to you." As the sun climbed towards noon, Ruth and Jonah found themselves alone among the wreckage. The cabin still stood, scarred but solid. The barn had survived intact, her animals safe if traumatized. Bodies were gone, but bloodstains remained, dark against the snow. "It's over," Jonah said, but it sounded like a question. Ruth looked at the knife cuts in her doorframe, the bullet holes that would need patching, the scorched wall that would need rebuilding. Then she looked at the man beside her, wounded, weary, but alive. They both were alive. "No," she said. "Now it begins. The real work, rebuilding, choosing what comes next." He turned to her. "Ruth, Are you staying?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything unspoken. He touched the graze on his temple, looked at the blood on his fingers, then at her face smudged with soot, fierce with hope. "If you'll have me, not as a hand, not as protection, as..." "As what?" "As whatever you'll allow. Partner, friend, maybe more, in time." He took her hands, rough and capable in his. I've got nothing to offer but a willingness to try, to be better than I was. Ruth thought of Harlan's letters promising respectability, safety, a proper life. All ash now, like the dreams they'd represented. In their place stood this offering uncertain, difficult, real. I don't need promises, she said. I need someone who'll stand beside me when the next storm comes. Someone who sees me as I am, not as they wish I was. I see you, Jonah said simply. Have since that first night. Strong enough to open a door in a blizzard. Wise enough to keep a rifle handy. Brave enough to fight for what's yours. Then yes, stay. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They stood together in the ruins of the morning's violence. Two damaged people choosing to build something new from the wreckage. Around them, the snow began to melt in the rising sun, revealing the earth beneath scarred but ready for spring, for new growth, for hope. Marshal North returned briefly with a document. Reward for Asa Crow and his gang. Enough to rebuild and then some. He touched his hat to Ruth. Ma'am, read. Try to keep the peace from here on. As his horse kicked up snow riding away, Ruth laughed again, cleaner this time. Keep the peace, as if we went looking for trouble. Trouble found us anyway. Jonah squeezed her hand. But we faced it, together. Together, Ruth agreed, and the word felt like a vow. They turned toward the cabin, toward the work of cleaning and rebuilding, toward whatever future they could forge from the ashes of their pasts. The morning's violence was already becoming memory, but the partnership forged in its crucible that was just beginning. The morning after the battle, Ruth found Jonah standing over Harlan's letter, the one with the strange numbers and references. His face was troubled, and she knew the respite from violence was over. There were still debts to settle, secrets to unearth. We need to go to the mine, he said without preamble. Silver Needle, shaft number 4. Whatever Harlan hid there. It's the last piece of this puzzle. Ruth set down her coffee cup. They'd spent the previous evening cleaning blood from her floors, patching the worst of the bullet holes, trying to restore some normalcy to her violated home. But normal was an illusion now. The money, she said. It wasn't a question. And more. I think Asa mentioned documents, evidence. If we don't get to it first, someone else will. There are always more Asa Crows in the world. More men willing to kill for easy wealth. She thought of refusing, of letting the past bury its own dead. But then she remembered Marshal North's words about the Army payroll, about families who'd never received death benefits because the money was stolen. Justice incomplete was injustice continued. When? Now, before word spreads too far about Asa's death, before his contacts in San Francisco or Denver send more men. Within an hour they were mounted and riding, supplies packed for a day's journey. The Silver Needle mine lay 15 miles north, abandoned these 10 years since the vein ran dry. Ruth had been there once as a child, when her father was called to treat injured miners. She remembered the gaping mouths of the shafts, dark throats that swallowed men whole. They rode in companionable silence, both lost in thought. The landscape changed from prairie to foothills, scattered pine giving way to denser forest. Snow still clung to the northern slopes, but spring was asserting itself in patches of bare earth and the sound of meltwater running. Tell me about Micah, Ruth said eventually. Not how he died, how he lived. Jonah was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 18 years old, thought he was immortal, quick with jokes, quicker with his gun. But there was gentleness in him too. Found him once nursing a hawk with a broken wing. Threatened to shoot me if I told the others. You cared for him. Like the little brother I never had. That's why Asa trusted me to watch him. Keep him back from the worst of it. He said, let him feel part of things without real danger. Jonah's laugh was bitter. But boys that age don't want safety. They want to prove themselves. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I knew he'd try something. Should have tied him to a tree. Knocked him cold. Something. Instead, I let him make his choice. He glanced at her. We're all walking consequences of our choices. Ruth, the lucky ones get to learn from them. They reached the mine as afternoon shadows grew long. The place was a monument to abandoned dreams, rusted equipment, collapsed buildings. Warning signs faded to illegibility. Shaft number 4 was set apart from the others, its entrance partially concealed by undergrowth. Stay alert, Jonah warned as they dismounted. Places like this attract all kinds of outlaws, drifters, anyone looking to disappear. They entered carefully. Jonah leading with a lantern, Ruth following with her rifle. The shaft angled down steeply, timbers groaning overhead. Water dripped steadily, and the air smelled of minerals and decay. 20 yards in, they found evidence of recent activity footprints in the mud, a fresh torch stub. Jonah knelt, studying the signs. 2 men, maybe 3 days ago, after the storm but before yesterday's fight. Asa's men. Possibly, or he stopped, head tilted. Someone's coming. They doused the lantern, pressing against the damp wall. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the mine, growing closer. Ruth's finger found the trigger, heart hammering. Then a voice called out, cultured and calm. Mr. Reed, Miss Avery, there's no need for dramatics. I'm quite alone and would prefer to discuss this civilized folks. A man emerged from the darkness, carrying his own lantern. He was perhaps 50, dressed too well for mine exploration city clothes, clean boots, hands that had never known hard labor. His smile was pleasant and entirely without warmth. Lyle Hemphill, he introduced himself. I represent certain interests in San Francisco, interests that had arrangements with the late Mr. Crow. No arrangements with us, Jonas said, not lowering his gun. Perhaps not, but you are here, which suggests you know what Mr. Pierce concealed in this delightful tomb. Hemphill spread his hands. I propose a simple division. You take whatever personal effects you're seeking, I take the money. Everyone walks away satisfied. And if we refuse, then no one walks away at all. His smile never wavered. I have 4 men outside. Good men. Expensive men. They have orders to seal this shaft if I don't emerge within the hour. Rather Egyptian, don't you think, buried with the treasure we sought? Ruth believed him. This soft-spoken man with his reasonable tone was more dangerous than all of Asa's rage. What makes you think we'd trust you? Because, my dear, I'm a businessman. Violence is expensive, messy, attracts attention. I'd much rather conclude this peacefully. He checked a gold pocket watch. 45 minutes now. Shall we proceed? They had no choice. Deeper they went. Following Harlan's cryptic directions, 3rd support beam, left passage. Mark of the double eagle. Finally. In a small chamber off the main tunnel. They found it an army ammunition crate. Sealed with wax and worry. Jonah broke it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the stolen payroll stacks of certificates, gold coins, currency. But beneath the money lay something else: photographs, documents, personal effects of the soldiers killed in the robbery. How touching, Hemphill observed. Conscience makes pack rats of us all. Mr. Pierce couldn't bear to let the dead stay anonymous. Ruth picked up a photograph, a young soldier, barely older than Micah had been, smiling beside a woman holding an infant. On the back, Private James Winters, Sarah, and little James Jr. Her throat tightened. This is blood money, she said. Every dollar cost a life. All money is blood money if you trace it back far enough. Hemphill replied, the question is whether it does good or ill in the present. Those certificates could fund a dozen charitable works in San Francisco, build an orphanage. Perhaps, wouldn't that honor the dead better than leaving it to rot? Or line your pockets, Jonah said flatly. That too, I'm not claiming sainthood. Mr. Reed, merely pragmatism. Ruth continued through the personal effects letters. Watches. A wooden cross carved with surprising skill. Each item a life story cut short. A family left wondering. She thought of her own losses. How she'd treasured every memento of her parents. No, she said suddenly. The money goes back to the army. The personal effects go to the families. That's the only justice here. Hemphill sighed. Noble. Foolish, but noble. I'm afraid I can't allow. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Hemphill's lantern shattered, plunging them into darkness broken only by Jonah's light. In the confusion, Ruth heard a struggle, a grunt of pain, then Jonah's voice. Run back passage. She grabbed the box of personal effects, leaving the money, and plunged into a narrow tunnel she'd noticed earlier. Behind her, footsteps and cursing. Jonah's hand found hers in the darkness, pulling her along. They stumbled through blackness, following air currents and instinct. Twice they hit dead ends, had to backtrack with pursuit growing closer. Then, blessed light, another entrance, half collapsed but passable. They squeezed through, gasping clean air, to find Hemphill's men waiting. Ah, said Hemphill, emerging behind them. Jacket torn but dignity intact. The predictability of desperate people. I knew there had to be another exit. You wouldn't trap yourselves willingly. 4 guns trained on them. Ruth clutched the box of mementos, thinking absurdly that at least the families would never know how close they'd come to answers. The money, Hemphill said, no longer pleasant. Now. Still in the mine, Jonah said, Shaft 4, where we left it. Then we'll all go back together. Move. This was it, Ruth thought. They'd survived Asa's rage only to die for refusing a businessman's deal. But as they turned, new voices rang out. Federal marshals, nobody move. Marshal North appeared with a dozen men, badges gleaming. Hemphill's hired guns calculated odds and wisely dropped their weapons. Timely as always, Marshal, Hemphill said smoothly. These 2 are robbing. Save it. North cut him off. We've been tracking you since Denver. Hemphill, interstate fraud, conspiracy, murder for hire. You'll have plenty of time to tell your story to a federal judge. As Hemphill and his men were led away, North turned to Ruth and Jonah. Got your message about coming here. Figured you might need backup. Message? Ruth was confused. They'd told no one. Jonah smiled slightly. Left word with Mrs. Harrington when I bought supplies this morning. Figured she'd spread it faster than telegraph. North laughed. That she did. Half the town knows by now. He sobered, looking at the box Ruth held. That what I think it is? Personal effects from the robbery victims. The money's still inside. We'll see it gets where it belongs. He studied them both. You did good here, real good. As the marshals secured the scene, Ruth and Jonah found themselves alone again. The sun was setting, painting the mountains crimson. She still held the box of mementos. Lives reduced to objects, but demanding remembrance. You could have made the deal, she said, taking the pragmatic path. Could have. He met her eyes. But I've got this partner now. She believes in doing right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Man would be a fool not to learn from that. Ruth set down the box and moved into his arms, not caring who might see. They held each other as darkness gathered. 2 people who'd chosen conscience over convenience, justice over safety. What now? She asked against his chest. Now we go home, fix what's broken, build what's missing. He pulled back to look at her. Unless you're having second thoughts about taking in a reformed outlaw. Reformed might be strong. Reforming, maybe. I'll take it. They loaded the box carefully onto Ruth's horse. Evidence of lives lost but not forgotten. Tomorrow would bring questions, paperwork. the slow grinding of justice. But tonight, they rode home together through deepening dusk, leaving the mind's darkness behind. The money would find its way back to the army, the mementos to grieving families. Hemphill would face federal justice, and somewhere, perhaps, Micah Crow and Private Winters and all the other young dead might rest easier knowing someone had finally chosen to do right by their memory. "You know," Ruth said as their horses picked their way down the mountain. "Harlan tried to do the right thing in the end, tried to preserve evidence, make amends. Too little too late, but yes, he tried." Jonah was quiet a moment. "We all carry our sins. Ruth, question is whether we let them define us or refine us." She thought about that as they rode, about choices and consequences, about the weight of the past and the possibility of the future. Behind them, the mine yawned dark and empty, its secrets finally surrendered. Ahead, her cabin waited, scarred but standing, ready for whatever came next. They were almost home when Jonah spoke again. "That thing Hemphill said about blood money doing good, was he wrong?" Ruth considered. "Maybe not entirely, but clean money can do good too. Better to earn it honest and spend it wise than steal it and try to wash it clean with charity. Speaking of earning honest, I'm going to need work. Real work. Can't live on fighting outlaws." "Well," Ruth said, suppressing a smile, "I could use help expanding the cheese operation, maybe some furniture repairs. Seems I heard something about a carpenter's son who might know his way around wood." "Might, at that." Jonah agreed. And for the first time since she'd met him, his smile held no shadows at all. They rode the last mile in comfortable silence. Two people who'd faced the worst and chosen the best, ready to build something new and clean and worthy from the ashes of all that had come before. The federal courthouse in Denver was a world away from Ruth's cabin, all marble floors and high ceilings, the weight of law made manifest in stone. She and Jonah sat on hard wooden benches, waiting to testify in Lyle Hemphill's trial. 3 weeks had passed since the mine. 3 weeks of attempted normalcy, punctuated by legal summons and the knowledge that their story wasn't finished yet. "State your name for the record." "Ruth Avery." The prosecutor, a thin man named Whitfield, led her through the events methodically. Hemphill sat at the defense table, still impeccably dressed, watching her with those cold eyes. But Ruth had faced down Asa Crow in her own yard. A businessman in a courtroom held no terrors. "Miss Avery, why did you refuse Mr. Hemphill's offer to split the stolen money?" Ruth looked directly at the jury. "Because it wasn't his to offer or mine to take. That money was stained with blood, soldiers who died, families who suffered. The only right thing was to return it. Even at risk to your own life. Especially then, what good is life if you live it wrong?" When Jonah took the stand, Hemphill's lawyer tried to paint him as a criminal turning on his associates for immunity. But Jonah's steady recounting of his past, the choices that led him to Asa's gang, Micah's death, his decision to leave rang with hard truth. "I was what they say," he admitted. "Did things I'll answer for come Judgment Day. But that doesn't make what Hemphill did right. He's the worst kind of thief, one who dresses it up pretty and calls it business." During a recess, Marshal North found them in the hallway. "You're doing good. Jury's listening." He paused. "There's something else. The Army's recovered most of the payroll, and those personal effects you saved, they've found next of kin for all but 2. Ruth felt a warmth in her chest. "The families know." "They know. Private Winter's widow particularly wanted me to thank you. Said knowing how he died, that someone cared enough to preserve his things, it helps." That afternoon brought drama. Hemphill's lawyer produced a surprise witness, Dobbs, who'd survived the battle at Ruth's cabin and been captured later. In exchange for leniency, he was ready to testify that Jonah had planned the whole thing, that Ruth was his accomplice. "That's a lie," Ruth said hotly, half rising from her seat. "In Miss Avery," the judge warned, "you'll have your chance at rebuttal. Dobbs spun a tale of Jonah masterminding the robbery, planning Harlan's death, seducing Ruth to get access to the hidden money. It was convincing enough that Ruth saw doubt creep into some jurors' faces. During cross-examination, Whitfield was surgical. "Mr. Dobbs, you say Mr. Reed planned everything, yet he's the one who informed Marshall North about the money's location. Part of his scheme. And he left the money in the mine rather than taking it." He got interrupted. "By Mr. Hemphill, who you haven't mentioned until now. Strange omission for such a detailed testimony." Dobbs began to sweat. Under pressure, his story crumbled. Finally, he admitted Hemphill had promised him reduced charges for lying. "I believe we've heard enough," the judge said coldly. "Bailiff, Mr. Dobbs will be charged with perjury in addition to his existing crimes." That evening, Ruth and Jonah walked Denver's streets, needing air after the courthouse's closeness. Gas lamps were just being lit, casting pools of yellow light in the gathering dusk. Dobbs almost had them believing, Ruth said. "Lies often sound prettier than truth. That's their power." Jonah stopped at a shop window where a carved wooden chair was displayed, his fingers pressed against the glass like a man touching a memory. "I could make better than that." "Then why don't you?" He looked at her. "Maybe I will. When this is done, set up a shop in Sagebrush Ford, make furniture for the locals. Ordinary life. Nothing ordinary about honest work." She took his arm. "Or about choosing to do it after what you've been." They were heading back to their hotel when it happened. 3 men stepped from an alley, and Ruth recognized the gleam of knives. Not guns too much noise in the city, but steel could kill just as dead. "Hemphill sends his regards," one said, lunging. Jonah moved like water, shoving Ruth clear while dodging the blade. But 3-1 were bad odds, and he was unarmed in deference to city ordinances. Ruth scrambled for anything useful, found a broken board, swung it at an attacker's knees. The fight was brutal, quick. Jonah took a cut across his ribs, another on his forearm, but his experience told, using their numbers against them. He got one man to stumble into another, created space. Ruth's board connected solidly with a skull, dropping one attacker. "Stop, police." Denver officers arrived, whistles shrieking. The remaining attackers fled. Jonah leaned against a wall, bleeding but standing. "Just once," he said to Ruth, managing a pained smile. "I'd like to get through a week without someone trying to kill us." At the hospital, as a doctor stitched him up, Marshall North appeared. "Hemphill's getting desperate. This attack just added attempted murder charges. You two all right?" "We're harder to kill than we look," Ruth said, holding Jonah's hand while the doctor worked. "Good, because I need you alive for tomorrow. Final testimony. Then closing arguments. This ends one way or another." That night, in Ruth's hotel room, propriety be damned after assassination attempts, they sat by the window watching the city sleep. Jonah's bandages showed white in the darkness. "When I was with Asa's gang," he said quietly, "I used to dream about disappearing into a city like this, become nobody, start clean." "What changed?" "Met a woman who makes cheese and fights outlaws. Realized being nobody wasn't the answer. Being somebody better was." Ruth leaned against his shoulder, careful of his wounds. "We could still disappear after the trial. Go somewhere neither of our pasts can follow." "Is that what you want?" She thought about it. "No, I want my cabin, my land, my life, but I want it honest, clean, no more running or hiding." "Then that's what we'll have." The next morning brought the trial's climax. Hemphill took the stand in his own defense, smooth as oil. He painted himself as a legitimate businessman caught up in others' crimes, trying only to recover stolen property for unnamed clients. But Whitfield was ready. He produced documents from Hemphill's hotel room correspondence with Asa Crow dating back months, lists of Army payroll schedules, detailed plans for moving stolen federal property across state lines. "These are forgeries," Hemphill insisted, but his composure cracked. The killing blow came from an unexpected source. A young woman in the gallery stood up, Sarah Winters, the widow from the photograph. She'd traveled from Kansas, carrying her husband's letters. "James wrote me about strange things happening before that robbery," she said, permission granted to speak. "Men asking questions about routes and schedules. He was worried." She looked at Hemphill. He described one man particularly. "Well-dressed, city accent, gold pocket watch," said the man made his skin crawl. Hemphill's watch was entered as evidence. The inscription inside, "2L for services rendered," matched the signature on certain incriminating documents. During closing arguments, Whitfield was eloquent. "This case isn't just about stolen money. It's about choosing law over lawlessness, right over convenience. Miss Avery and Mr. Reed had every opportunity to profit from blood money. Instead, they risked their lives to see justice done. Can we do any less?" The jury deliberated for 2 hours, guilty on all counts. As Hemphill was led away, he paused near Ruth and Jonah. "You could have been rich," he said, genuinely puzzled. "Why throw that away for strangers' ghosts?" "Because some things matter more than money," Ruth replied. "You'll have time to think about what those might be." Outside the courthouse, in bright mountain sunshine, Marshal North shook their hands. "The Army's authorized a reward. Not the full percentage that would make you rich as Croesus, but enough to rebuild proper, start fresh." "And Jonah," Ruth asked. "His past?" "What past far as federal records show? Jonah Reed's a carpenter from Missouri who helped recover stolen Army property. Man like that could settle anywhere. Make an honest life." Ruth felt Jonah's hand tighten on hers. A second chance, official and clean. "There's more," North continued. "Mrs. Winters asked me to give you this." He handed Ruth a small package. Inside was a carved wooden cross, the one from the personal effects. "Says her husband made it during long nights on watch. Wants you to have it, for making sure his story got told." Ruth's eyes burned. "I can't." "You can and will. Woman drove 3 days to see justice done for her man. Least you can do is accept her thanks." As North walked away, Ruth and Jonah stood on the courthouse steps, free and clear for the first time since they'd met. The city bustled around them, full of possibility. "Home?" Jonah asked. "Home," Ruth agreed. "We've got a cabin to finish fixing and a life to build." They walked toward the train station, leaving the courthouse and all it represented behind. Justice had been served, debts paid, truth told. Now came the harder part, living up to the second chance they'd earned. But Ruth thought of her cheese-making, of Jonah's hands shaping wood, of ordinary days unmarked by violence or flight. They'd proven themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Now to prove themselves in everyday ones, the true test of character. "You know," Jonah said as they boarded the train, "I've been thinking about those furniture pieces. Start small, build reputation, maybe a cradle first." Ruth's step faltered. "A cradle?" "Man's got to plan ahead." His smile was warm, nervous, hopeful. "That is, if you're thinking along similar lines. Eventually, when we're proper married and settled." She laughed, feeling lightness she'd forgotten existed. "Jonah Reed, are you proposing while boarding a train?" "I'm suggesting a future. The proposal I'll do right, when I've got something more to offer than just willing hands and a mended past." "Those might be enough," Ruth said softly. "More than enough." The train pulled away from Denver, carrying them back toward Sagebrush Ford, toward home, behind them. The courthouse stood solid against the sky, temple to the justice they'd helped secure. Ahead lay simpler things, daily work, quiet evenings, the slow building of trust into love. They'd walked through fire and chosen honor. Now came the reward. Not gold or glory, but the chance to live ordinary lives extraordinarily well. Spring came to Colorado territory like a blessing after a hard penance. The snow melted, revealing earth ready for planting, and the air carried promises of new growth. Ruth stood in her doorway, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, a cup of coffee warming her hands. It had been a year since that storm brought Jonah Reed to her door, a year of rebuilding not just walls and fences, but lives. The cabin bore scars from the battle with Asa Crow, but they'd transformed them into character. Bullet holes became part of the wall's story, patched but not hidden. The scorched section had been rebuilt stronger, with a window Jonah installed to let in more light. No sense living in shadows, he'd said, crafting the frame with careful hands. Morning. Jonah emerged from the barn, carrying fresh eggs. He moved easier now, the watchfulness still there, but tempered by purpose. His carpenter's shop, built with the reward money, stood beside the barn, already gaining reputation for quality work. Samuel Morrison wants a dining set, Ruth said, taking the eggs. Says your rocking chair's the finest he's seen. Tom's a good man, gave us a chance when others wouldn't. It was true. Their return to Sagebrush Ford hadn't been simple. Some folks couldn't forget Jonah's past or forgive Ruth for harboring an outlaw, however reformed. But Marshall North's endorsement carried weight, and slowly, project by project, meal by meal, they'd earned their place. School committee meets today, Ruth reminded him. They're voting on the proposal. Her proposal to start a small school for the growing number of immigrant children whose parents worked the ranches. Ruth had discovered teaching while helping neighbors' children with letters, found she had a gift for it. They'll say yes, Jonah said confidently. Even Mrs. Harrington's coming around. Mentioned yesterday your cheese is the best in 3 counties. She just likes the gossip I provide. Ruth laughed, but it was fun now. The town busybody had become an unlikely ally, spreading news of Jonah's furniture and Ruth's cheese with the same efficiency she'd once spread scandal. After breakfast, they worked in comfortable rhythm, Ruth tending her expanded dairy operation, Jonah in his shop shaping pine into purpose. The sound of his tools had become the heartbeat of their days, steady and sure. Mid-morning brought a visitor. Ruth looked up from churning butter to see a rider approaching a woman, travel-worn but sitting straight in her saddle. "Can I help you?" Ruth called, noting Jonah had appeared in his shop doorway, alert to strangers. The woman dismounted, revealing a face marked by sun and sorrow, but lifted by hope. "I'm looking for Ruth Avery and Jonah Reed. Name's Martha Coleman. I think you found something belonged to my boy." Ruth's heart clenched. Another mother, another ghost from that terrible robbery. "Come inside, please. You've traveled far." "From Nebraska. Got the letter from the Army 2 months ago about Ben's things being recovered." Martha's voice wavered. "Took me this long to gather courage to come." They sat at Ruth's table, the same one where Jonah had bled that first night, now polished by daily use. Martha pulled out a letter. Official Army stationery. "Says here you two risked your lives to return my boy's effects. His watch, letters, a photograph of him and his sister." Tears tracked down weathered cheeks. "I need to know why." Ruth reached for Jonah's hand. "Because every stolen dollar meant a family left wondering. Your son died serving his country. The least we could do was ensure he wasn't forgotten." Martha broke then, shoulders shaking. Ruth moved around the table, holding the older woman as she grieved. Jonah quietly made coffee, giving them space for sorrow. 20 years old, Martha whispered. Joined up to make something of himself, send money home for his sister's education, and now, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, it's just having his things, knowing someone cared enough to preserve them. It means the world." They talked through the afternoon. Martha shared stories of Ben, his love of horses, his terrible singing voice, how he'd carved toys for local children. in return. Ruth told her how they'd found the effects, the choice to return them rather than let them disappear. "You could have kept quiet," Martha said. "No one would have known." "We would have known," Jonah said simply. "That's weight enough." As evening approached, they insisted Martha stay for supper and the night, over the meal. She noticed the carved wooden cross on Ruth's mantel, the gift from Sarah Winters. "From another mother?" "A widow. She wanted us to have it. A reminder that doing right matters." Martha nodded slowly. "Ben would have liked knowing people like you exist. Makes his sacrifice. Not worthwhile. Nothing makes losing a child worthwhile. But honored, respected." That night, after Martha retired to the small guest room they'd added, Ruth and Jonah sat by the fire. These visits came periodically, family members seeking connection to their lost, drawn by the Army's letters about recovered effects. Each one carved fresh pain and strange healing. "Ever regret it?" Jonah asked. "We could have taken that money, disappeared, lived easy. Every time a mother cries at our table, every time we help a family find peace." Ruth shook her head. "Never. This is better, harder, but cleaner. We can look people in the eye." A week later, the school committee approved Ruth's proposal. The old garrison cabin, abandoned when the family moved to California, would be converted. Jonah volunteered to build desks and chairs. Other townspeople offered supplies. The night of the decision, Reverend Palmer pulled Ruth aside. "Year ago, folks were ready to run you out for harboring a gunman. Now you're teaching their children. That's the power of choosing right, Miss Avery. It changes hearts, yours and theirs." Summer brought its own rhythms. The school opened with 12 students, children of Swedish immigrants, Irish railroad workers, Mexican vaqueros. Ruth discovered joy in watching understanding dawn in young faces, in giving them tools to build better lives than their parents had known. Jonah's business flourished, his furniture solid, graceful. Built to last found homes throughout the territory. He hired Jim Washington, a freed slave heading west, teaching him the trade. Together they filled orders from Denver to Cheyenne. One evening in late August, as they walked by the creek, Jonah stopped suddenly. "Ruth, I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," she teased, but her heart accelerated. They'd been dancing around something for months, both knowing but neither speaking it. "That cradle I mentioned in Denver, I finished it." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "It's in the shop, but I realized can't give a cradle to an unmarried woman. Wouldn't be proper." "Heaven forbid you do anything improper," Ruth said, fighting a smile. "So I figured." He dropped to one knee there by the water, pulling out a simple silver ring. "Ruth Avery, you've made me want to be better than I was. Shown me how to build instead of destroy. Would you, that is, will you marry me?" Ruth looked at him, this man who'd arrived bloody in a storm, who'd taught her to fight and she'd taught to hope, who'd chosen honor over easy money and work over wandering. "Yes," she said simply. "Of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, rose to kiss her as the sunset painted the world in shades of promise. They were married a month later, Reverend Palmer presiding, the whole town turning out even Mrs. Harrington dabbing her eyes and declaring she'd known all along they were meant for each other. Marshall North came down from Denver, bringing an unexpected guest, Martha Coleman, who'd become a regular correspondent. "Wouldn't miss this," Martha said, embracing Ruth. "You gave me back a piece of my boy. Least I can do is see you happy." The ceremony was simple, the celebration joyful. Tom Morrison played fiddle. Children from Ruth's school scattered wildflowers, and Jonah's furniture gleamed in the church, his donation to the congregation, beauty offered in gratitude. That night, in their cabin transformed by lamplight and laughter, Ruth and Jonah danced to music drifting from the ongoing celebration in town. The cradle he'd made sat in the corner, promise of futures yet to come. "No regrets?" Ruth asked, echoing his question from months before. "Only one," Jonah said, spinning her gently. that it took a blizzard and bloodshed to bring us together. Wish I'd found you sooner. Easier. But then we'd be different people. I needed to learn strength alone before I could share it. You needed to face your past before you could build a future. Philosophy from a school teacher, he murmured against her hair. I married above myself. Carpenter's wisdom, she countered. We married exactly right. First snow came early that year, echoing their beginning. But now the cabin stood strong against it, improved by trial and time. Ruth watched from the window as Jonah split wood, each movement economical and sure. Inside, bread rose by the stove. The school's lessons waited for tomorrow, and the cradle stood ready for hope to fill it. She thought of Harlan Pierce, whose death had started this journey. He'd promised her respectability in letters, safety in distant dreams. Instead, she'd found something better, a partner who'd seen her at her worst and stayed, who'd helped her become not what society expected, but what she chose to be. A knock at the door interrupted her musings. Jonah entered, stamping snow from his boots, bringing cold air and warmth together. Letter came, he said, handing her an envelope. From Denver. Inside, Marshall North's scrawl. Thought you'd want to know Lyle Hemphill died in prison. Hart gave out. Before he went, he asked the chaplain to tell you he finally understood what mattered more than money. Too late for him, but maybe his learning counts for something. Stay well, stay honest, E.N. Ruth folded the letter slowly. Even Hemphill, in the end, had found a grain of truth. She looked around her home, scarred by violence, but strengthened by choice, filled with purpose and promise. I waited for a kind husband, she said softly, remembering that long-ago thought. What I found was a good man willing to become better. That's worth more than kindness, it's truth. Jonah wrapped his arms around her from behind, reading over her shoulder. And I promised protection with a dangerous smile. Turns out the most dangerous thing was learning to live safe. They stood together as snow fell beyond their windows. No longer strangers brought together by storm, but partners who'd weathered them all, violence and trial, doubt and distance, to reach this place of chosen peace. The fire crackled. Bread scented the air. Somewhere in town, children were practicing letters she'd taught them, sitting at desks he'd built, small acts, ordinary grace, but revolutionary in their simple rightness. What are you thinking? Jonah asked. That I'm not waiting anymore. Ruth replied, for anything. We're here, we're whole, we're home. Home, he agreed, and the word held all their journey from that first desperate knock to this quiet evening, from strangers seeking shelter to partners building life. Outside, the snow continued, but inside was warmth and light and the promise of all the ordinary days to come, days they'd earned with courage, chosen with wisdom, and would live with grateful hearts. The storm had brought them together. Their choices had kept them there. And in the end, that made all the difference, not fate or accident, but the daily decision to build something worthy from whatever materials life provided. They'd learned the hardest lesson, and the simplest, that love wasn't a feeling or a promise or a shelter from storms. It was a choice, renewed each morning, to face whatever came together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below, and let's connect and share our thoughts about Ruth and Jonah's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage, redemption, and love in the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.